The rain had just stopped when the convoy of black SUVs rolled up to the grand, cream-painted mansion in Lekki Phase 1. The house stood like a proud giant, its gold-plated gates opening automatically, as though even the metal knew the weight of the event about to unfold. Inside, crystal chandeliers twinkled, reflecting the warm glow of the late afternoon sun that spilled through the massive arched windows. The event was the gathering, a dinner organized by my mother-in-law, Madame Funk Adeyemi, in honor of her late husband's business partners and their families. It was the type of social event where appearances were everything and status determined the seating arrangement. I, Adeyemi, sat quietly at the far end of the long, polished mahogany dining table, feeling out of place. Not because I didn't belong in wealth, I grew up in a comfortable home in Enugu, but because I had long learned that my presence in the Adeyemi household was tolerated more than it was embraced. From the moment I married her only son, Tade, Madame Funk had treated me like an outsider. My background wasn't illustrious enough, my accent too Eastern, and my approach to life too simple for her refined standards. Still, I came tonight because Tade insisted. He wanted me to show my face and be civil, as if his mother hadn't once told me during our engagement party that I was a project to be polished. The room hummed with the low laughter of Lagos elite, people exchanging stories about European vacations, offshore investments, and the latest political drama. I had been quiet all evening, preferring to sip my pineapple juice and observe. Then it happened. One of the guests, a regal-looking woman draped in a turquoise ghillie and matching lace, leaned toward my mother-in-law and whispered something, her gaze briefly flicking to me. I couldn't hear the question, but I caught the response. "Oh, her?" Madame Funk chuckled lightly, waving her bejeweled hand dismissively. "That's just the maid. She's helping us serve tonight." For a second, I froze. My fork hovered mid-air. The laughter at the table didn't stop, though it shifted, some chuckles masked as coughs, some smirks quickly hidden behind wineglasses. A cold wave of shame rushed over me, followed by something hotter, rage. I could feel my pulse pounding in my ears. The old me, the Adeyemi who was raised to respect elders at all costs, would have swallowed the insult and smiled. But life had taught me that silence in the face of disrespect only bred more of it. I set down my fork. Slowly. Deliberately. Then I stood, my chair scraping softly against the marble floor, drawing the attention of everyone in the room. "Good evening," I began, my voice steady but cutting through the chatter like a blade. I suppose introductions are in order since there seems to be some confusion about who I am. The room went still. Even the servers paused mid-step. "I am Adeyemi, I continued, letting the name hang in the air. And as of last week, I am the new Chief Executive Officer of Adeyemi Holdings." Gasps fluttered around the table like startled birds. A man in a navy agbada nearly choked on his wine. From the corner of my eye, I caught my husband's expression, a mixture of shock and something that looked suspiciously like pride. But my mother-in-law, her smile had frozen, her eyes narrowing into slits. I could feel the questions forming in the air. How? When? Why hadn't anyone known? I didn't give them time to ask. "Yes," I said, "Tate's father entrusted the company to me before he passed. He believed in my vision. He believed in me." My gaze slid deliberately to Madame Funk. "And I will honor that trust." The silence was deafening. I sat back down, picking up my fork as though I had merely stood to adjust my chair. The conversations eventually resumed, though the tone had shifted, the laughter was now tight, the smiles strained. Madame Funk didn't say another word to me for the rest of the evening. But let me tell you something the guests didn't know: becoming CEO wasn't a smooth, fairy tale appointment. It was the result of a storm that had been brewing for months, one that began long before my marriage to Tade was tested, long before I learned that power was never freely given, it was taken. It started the year before, when Baba Adeyemi fell gravely ill. While the family argued about medical expenses and treatment options, I was the one who stayed by his side at the hospital, often sleeping in the visitor's chair, holding his hand during the long nights. He was a proud man, deeply invested in the company he had built from scratch. He often told me stories about the early days, how he had sold his car to fund the first shipment of goods, how he had driven a rickety truck himself to make deliveries. I listened. I asked questions. I cared. And slowly, I think he began to see something in me that went beyond being Tade's wife. When the board began fighting over succession plans, most assumed Tade would take over. But Tade, he wasn't interested. His passion lay in tech startups, not oil and gas. One night, while the others had gone home, Baba called me closer. His voice was weak, but his eyes were sharp. "Adeobi," he said, "you have the patience to listen, and the courage to decide. I trust you. If anything happens to me, promise me you will protect this company." I promised. He died 2 weeks later. The reading of his will was the explosion that rocked the family. In it, Baba left control of Adeyemi Holdings to me, stipulating that I would serve as CEO for at least 3 years before the board could vote me out. His reasoning was clear: he wanted the company run by someone who valued integrity over politics. The backlash was immediate. Madam Funk accused me of manipulation. Some of the uncles threatened legal action. But the will was airtight. I spent the next 6 months proving myself, attending board meetings, making tough calls, and surviving the constant sabotage from relatives who wanted me gone. So when I stood in that dining room and introduced myself, it wasn't just a power move, it was the culmination of a battle I had fought quietly, strategically, and alone. That night, after the guests had left and the house was quiet, I went upstairs to our bedroom. Tade was sitting on the edge of the bed, his tie loosened, his expression unreadable. "You could have told me," he said finally. I met his gaze. "Told you what? That I'm tired of being disrespected in my own home? That your mother has been undermining me since day one?" He sighed, rubbing his temples. "You embarrassed her tonight." "No," I said sharply. "She embarrassed herself. And she needed to know who she was talking to." For a moment, there was only the sound of the rain starting again against the window. Then he looked at me, a small smile tugging at his lips. "You were impressive." I didn't smile back. My mind was already racing ahead, because I knew tonight wasn't the end of it. My mother-in-law would not take this humiliation lightly. And in a family like the Adeyemis, power struggles didn't end with public victories, they went underground, where the real wars were fought. What I didn't know then was just how far she would go to try and take me down. The next morning, the Adeyemi mansion felt different. The air was heavy, like the moments before a tropical storm. I could hear the faint clink of cutlery from the kitchen, but the rest of the house was unusually quiet. When I came downstairs, Madame Funk was seated in the living room, perfectly dressed in a deep purple iro and buba, sipping her tea as though the previous night hadn't happened. But her eyes, they followed me with the cold precision of a hunter tracking prey. "Good morning, Mama," I said evenly. Her smile was small, deliberate. "Good morning, CEO." The title dripped from her lips like a taunt. We sat in silence for a few moments before she leaned forward, placing her teacup on the glass table. "Adeobi, I want to give you some advice. Free of charge." I raised an eyebrow. "Power in this family," she said slowly, "is not written in wills or stamped on documents. It is managed. And if you think what happened last night makes you untouchable, you are gravely mistaken." I met her gaze, refusing to flinch. "Are you threatening me?" Her laugh was soft, almost amused. "My dear, I don't threaten. I act." She stood, smoothing her wrapper, and walked away. That week, strange things began happening at the company. First, a client called to cancel a multi-million-naira contract without explanation. Then, a key supplier suddenly reviewed their terms, doubling their prices. Rumors began swirling in the industry, rumors that I was inexperienced, reckless, even that I was diverting funds. I knew exactly where this was coming from. Still, I refused to react rashly. If Baba had taught me anything, it was that in business, you don't fight every battle, only the ones that matter. Instead, I spent my days quietly gathering evidence, tracing the whispers back to their sources. One afternoon, as I was leaving the office, I spotted a familiar car parked discreetly across the street. I recognized the driver, Mama's personal chauffeur. She wasn't even hiding it. The final straw came at the quarterly board meeting. I was presenting a new expansion plan for Adiemi Holdings, one that would open operations in 3 other African countries, when one of the uncles interrupted me mid-sentence. "This is madness," he said, slamming his palm on the table. "You are pushing the company toward ruin. We cannot allow this to continue." Before I could respond, another board member slid a file across the table. "We've received complaints," he said, avoiding my eyes. Inside were printed screenshots of anonymous emails alleging that I had forged contracts and bribed foreign partners. It was a setup. And sitting at the end of the table, her face an unreadable mask, was my mother-in-law. I didn't take the bait. Instead, I leaned back in my chair and spoke calmly. "Gentlemen," I said, "I expected resistance. I also expected that certain family members might resort to sabotage." My eyes flicked briefly to Madame Funk. "So I came prepared." From my bag, I pulled out a thick folder and handed copies to each board member. Inside were documented cases of my mother-in-law's behind-the-scenes interference, recorded phone calls, leaked messages from her allies, even a signed letter from one of the suppliers admitting he'd been pressured to break our agreement. The room went silent. "This company is bigger than personal grudges," I continued. "If we want to honor Baba's legacy, we need to move forward together. Or, you can spend the next few months explaining to the press why your own family tried to destroy you from within." One by one, the board members nodded. Even the uncles looked uneasy. But I knew this wasn't over. Madame Funk's eyes told me so. This was only round 1. 2 weeks after the board meeting, the house was quieter than it had ever been. Madame Funk barely spoke to me, her movements around the mansion calculated and deliberate. When she did look at me, it was the kind of look that made you check your back twice. But outside, the company was stabilizing. The expansion plan had been approved, the cancelled contract reinstated, and the suppliers were back on our side. Every victory felt like a silent slap to her, but I didn't gloat. Instead, I kept my focus forward. Still, I knew she wouldn't let the tension rot in silence for long. And I was right. One Sunday evening, Tate invited both of us to the family lounge. He stood in the center of the room, looking nervous. "Ada, Mama." "I'm tired," he said, his voice trembling slightly. "I can't keep choosing between my wife and my mother. We need to talk." Mama's lips curved into a faint smile, but it didn't reach her eyes. "There is nothing to talk about," she said. "This girl," she gestured toward me, "does not respect me, and she never will." I inhaled slowly. "Mama, respect is earned, not demanded. You have insulted me in public, undermined my position, and tried to sabotage the company your husband entrusted to me." Her expression darkened. "That company is my family's blood. You were lucky to marry into it." "No," I said firmly, "I was trusted into it." "There's a difference." The air between us thickened. Tate sat down, burying his face in his hands. "Mama, Baba chose her," he said quietly. "You may not like it, but he saw something in Ada that you refused to see. Fighting her means you're fighting his memory." Her jaw tightened. For the first time, I saw a flicker of uncertainty in her eyes. Weeks later, something unexpected happened. Mama came to my office at the company, unannounced. She wore a simple Ankara dress, not her usual elaborate lace and heavy gold. When she entered, I stood, ready for another round. But she surprised me. "I have been thinking," she said, lowering herself into the chair opposite my desk. "I was wrong to humiliate you that night. I was wrong to think you could not handle this role. Her words were stiff, but they were words I never thought I'd hear. I fought you, she continued, because I was afraid. Afraid you would erase me from the story. Afraid you would forget that I too built this family alongside my husband. I sat back slowly. Mama, I never wanted to erase you. I wanted us to work together. But respect goes both ways. For the first time, she nodded without arguing. Then, let us start again. That evening, I thought about her words. It wasn't a perfect truce, trust like that takes years to build, and one apology doesn't rewrite history. But it was a start. And as I looked out of my office window, watching the city lights of Lagos blink against the night sky, I realized something important. Power isn't about titles. It isn't about money or who sits at the head of the table. It's about how you choose to use it, whether to destroy or to build. Madame Funk had used hers to guard her pride. I would use mine to protect what mattered and open doors for others. Because in the end, status fades. But the way you treat people, whether they are guests at your table or the so-called maid in the corner, that stays in their memory forever. When respect is mutual, power becomes a tool for unity, not a weapon for destruction. And sometimes, the greatest victory is not in winning the war, but in choosing to end it.